Okay, I say we go ahead and get started. Welcome to Sifted's peak season prep class. I'm Caleb Nelson, where I work for Sifted. We are data parcel experts. And the purpose of this class is to make sure that you are as prepped as possible for a couple of major events that are happening right now in the parcel world. The first of which we're going to touch on and get into as we go through it, is a potential UPS strike that may or may not happen at the end of this month. We'll see the impact of it next month if it does take place. I'm really curious to see what you all, we've got a number of customers that are on this webinar. And I really encourage a discussion. So if you have a question or a comment, drop it in the Q&A section. You can see on your Zoom bar there's a Q&A button. Go ahead and click on that, type in that question, type in that comment. If you're seeing something in the marketplace, something that was unique, subject to maybe the UPS strike situation, certain things you've heard from your UPS reps, I think that would be extremely valuable information for everybody on the call. And the second component to this is what's coming right at the heels, and why you sign up for this is peak season. This peak season is set to be, I think, a very erratic peak season. And so being as prepped as possible for this, as much as you can, is going to be extremely important. And the third and final area that we're going to touch on is really kind of the GRI, which is going to, I can't believe we're talking about it, but it's just right around the corner. That GRI comes at the heels of peak season. Sometimes they overlap. So it all happens at once. It's really important that we get a good picture here. And you've got about less than 100 days till peak season starts. So I'm going to throw it over a couple of things here that we're going to talk about, and I'm going to just keep my eye on the Q&A. The couple questions I've had around the UPS Teamster strike. Has anybody seen anything that they've heard from their UPS reps that leans one way or another from the UPS strike situation? While I ask that, and I'll look for the Q&A, I'll indicate what we're seeing here at Sifted. We're seeing saber rattling happening on the Teamster side heavily. So whether they are preparing to strike or just saying that they're preparing to strike, it's a very difficult situation to read. But they are 100% verbally indicating to their drivers that if they don't get what they want, a strike is going to take place. That's kind of a freaky situation. I think this is the first time we've been back in a strike situation really this heavily since they first went on strike in 1997. So some interesting things that are happening there. I'm going to look to the Q&A. Does anybody have any questions that they have around the UPS strike and the Teamster situation right now and what's to come potentially this next month? Okay, I'll keep my eye on this Q&A section. If anybody has any questions, drop it in there. I'll stop and we'll talk about it. The more interactive we can make this, the better it's going to be. A couple of the questions we're getting from customers are we in a recession right now? All of these four top main issues will impact peak season. And there's some ambiguity on whether or not these items are going to actually happen. So there's going to be some ambiguity around the peak season. And I think as a shipper, I would want to be prepared for either outcome. The second question we're getting, are we in a recession right now? That will impact GRI and the peak season for sure. Has the pendulum swung back to a shipper's market? From what we're seeing right now in terms of, it being a carrier market or a shipper's market, we are 100% in a shipper's market right now. Volumes have declined from the height of COVID. We're starting to see shippers regain more traction in the negotiations with FedEx and UPS. They're getting a little bit more aggressive on discounts that they're providing. And with this potential strike situation, UPS does not want to lose any customers. And I really believe that we're headed in that. I personally believe that we're headed in that market of it's going to be right on that line of August 1st strike. So that really kind of comes into what will the GRI look like? And I think really at this point, let's dive into a couple of different areas in terms of how it will be impacted and what's going to come up. Oh, we've got our first question here is, when do we expect the carriers to announce their peak season charges? It's typically done August timeframe, September timeframe. It kind of depends on the year and depends on the carrier, but August, September, and then it will go into effect in October. And it will run from October. This last year it ran past where it's usually ran, but October to about middle of January. That's a good question. So you've got, I would say 30 days until they're going to announce what the peak season actually looks like. So with all of these market conditions that are happening right now, we still really believe that there's something that you can do about it. A big area in which you can do that is understanding your data. So here's 5 tips we're going to get into. Number 1 is plan earlier than you usually planned. And I think that's why a number of you are on this call. Be open to change. And I mean that in terms of carrier diversification and understanding where you're weak in your parcel spend, meaning what freight is ugly freight, what freight is not desirable for the carrier, what freight is going to be hit really hard from a peak season. Understanding your data is going to be key. If you're not a Sifted client and you're on this call and you're not going through your data, you're going to be left kind of flat-footed on this situation just because there's so many things that are changing. In order to be able to understand the importance that the levers you can pull and how important they are, it's going to be found in the data. I think knowing what to do with your data is going to be key, and then get your systems in order, which means start to have plans in place or contingency in place. So I'm going to pause here. What questions do you guys have? Are you seeing anything in the marketplace that you want to discuss? And is there anything in terms of product size, box sizes, that you might be shipping that you're afraid is going to get hit really hard from a peak season standpoint? I'll pause for a minute and look to the Q&A. If anybody has questions, drop it in there. I'd be happy to answer. Chris, which industries is typically hit harder by peak season increases? It's really good. It's a great question. The carriers don't really operate from industry. They operate from size of box, destination, location, and if it's going residential or commercial. E-commerce is going to get hit harder. E-commerce businesses that ship bigger, bulkier items will be hit the hardest. And I'm meaning this in terms of like a significant price increase from where you're currently shipping today. If you're shipping nice, socks in a tight little box of, 2 inch by 2 inch by 2 inch, and they're going business to commercial, you won't be impacted nearly as much. The carriers are going to maximize margin, which is why we're talking about the strike too. UPS is going to have to pay more to keep those drivers happy, regardless of if they strike now or 2 weeks into a strike or they avoid a strike. They're gonna have to pay more. We believe that some of that payment is going to come from in the form of peak season surcharges and GRI. So if you're shipping SKUs that are heavier, bulkier, might not be heavy, but takes up a lot of space in the truck or the airplane, be prepared. Good question, Chris. Thank you. I'll keep my eye open to the Q&A here too. So as we've talked about, this year is more complex than other years in the past. There are more variabilities that are potentially coming up to either make that GRI a really aggressive GRI and peak season. And then I would say the second one is really critical. Adjust your processes. And I mean this in terms of if you are managing a transportation budget, start having conversations internally with your team on what a Q4 budget increase is going to look like, because it will show on the bottom line. And the last thing you want to be in a situation where it's Q1 next year and you're having to answer for, why did my budget increase way out of scope, and needing to answer that. Getting out ahead of it beforehand, communicating it, I think is extremely important. Number two, I think be open to change. This is a massive one that we are helping shippers with every day. And this is change in two ways. Carrier diversification. So if you have all your eggs in one basket with one carrier getting the primary amount of your freight, you're at more risk for watching that budget increase beyond a point where you might feel comfortable, or beyond a point where it could be detrimental to the profitability of your product or your business. Creating swim lanes with carriers that want specific business, I think is really, really key. 5-10 years ago, the rule of thumb is you give all of your freight to one carrier and maximize your discounts by increasing volume. The carriers are now getting more specific of what kind of freight they want, and they are penalizing those shippers that aren't giving them that kind of freight. So understanding where you're strong with that particular carrier, what that carrier wants, understanding where you're weak, and then finding a match of another carrier that could potentially want to move that freight, and be either incentivized to move it by giving you better discounts, or cost mitigation by not charging you so much in a peak season, not having that hit so hard, I think is really important. So conversations with, if you're a 100% UPS shipper, you should be having conversations with FedEx as well, learning on splitting that volume out, USPS, DHL Global Mail on certain size shipments that make sense for that. You know, there's a lot of options on Pitney Bowes. But also, I think if you haven't had conversations with regional carriers like OnTrack, LaserShip, now is a great time to be able to do that. Not only does it secure you from a strike position and allows you to have some freight that's going out the door, but it really allows you to have some availability in making sure that you're giving the right freight to the right carrier. I'm going to pause here. Anybody have questions on regional carriers, splitting some of that volume up? It's kind of challenging to split some of that volume away from either FedEx or UPS and give it to somebody else. Anybody have any questions around that and kind of getting out ahead of that beforehand? Or does anybody have any questions just in general on peak season? I know we can answer it, but. Okay, tip number 3 is have up-to-date data. I'm going to show you a couple examples in the Sifted tool when we're done on what areas you should be looking for in your data that you'll see a larger increase on for peak season. I think running an analysis, if you're a Sifted client, reach out to us. We'll run that analysis depending upon how you're set up in our system. Or if you're not a Sifted client, find somebody who can, or reach out to us. We'd be happy to talk to you about it. But I think this portion of understanding where the carriers are going to hit really hard, matching that up to if you have shipments that fall under that category. And then as it's announced in 30 days or so, running the analysis of saying, okay, UPS and FedEx have come in at X, Y, and Z for these increases in these areas that are going to impact me. What's the total impact going to be? Again, communicating that out with your team members in terms of budget, I think is extremely important. Okay, tip number 4 is know what to do with your data, which we've talked about, that running that model analysis, and then weighing the pros and cons to changes. Sometimes it's not always a 1-for-1 in terms of, hey, I can plug this new carrier in and I'm going to get direct similar service with them. You might get improved service with increased cost. You might get lower cost with increased service times. So it might not always be, a perfect situation, but I think running the pros and cons to say, okay, during these months, we're going to lean on these carriers heavier. And then after peak season, we're going to bring that back and give it to our primary carriers that we normally have. That's a great strategy to have. Okay, any other questions at this point right now? If not, I'm going to finish up with number 5, and then I'm going to show you a couple aspects in the data that you need to be aware of or looking for to help kind of calculate that out. Okay, get your systems in order. I think a logistics intelligence platform like Sifted is a great one to have. Understanding real-time visibility from a point of shipment system. So if you have some rules that you're seeing errors or issues, pain that's happening, being able to fix it prior to those shipments going out is extremely important. And then forecasting out that budget increase. I'm also going to recommend that if you haven't subscribed to our Unboxed newsletter, this is a previous peak season surcharge breakdown that we ran for the 2021-2022 peak season surcharges. This is going to be similar as FedEx and UPS announce their peak seasons. We will categorize it, visualize it for you, show you which dates are going to be impacted until when, and then the major ones that are going to take place. So this is a great, go to sifted.com, and on that lower right-hand corner, there's a box that will pop up for you to subscribe to Unboxed. As the carriers announce these changes, you'll get access to the newest information. I think it's really important that you have that. Okay, so diving into a couple of different aspects here of what this actually looks like. In the Sifted platform, or if you're just downloading carrier data, a couple areas that we would focus on that are going to hit really hard to Chris's question earlier, not necessarily industry, but what surcharges do you have that are going to overlap with some of the peak surcharges that they're going to heavily increase? Some of those are going to be residential fees for sure. You've got oversized fees as well, and then additional handling fees. You also have additional weight in certain areas there. But if you're a shipper and these surcharges look familiar, let's go through them. Residential delivery fees, oversized fees, delivery area surcharge, additional handling, and additional weight. It's going to be a more painful peak season than if you do not have these surcharges. Chances are, if you're a shipper, you're listening to this, you probably have some of these surcharges. What questions? I'm going to pause here. What questions do you have around this or in the peak season in general? In the Sifted platform here, and I'm going to show you capability of just drilling down. We're going to take your additional handling surcharges and break down how many different ways FedEx and UPS charge additional handling surcharges on your account. Here's all the fees that make up additional handling surcharges. So here's how many different ways they can charge you that. In the Sifted platform, we are going to identify peak surcharges. You will get hit with the traditional additional handling surcharge on top of a peak surcharge. And we're going to split it out so you can be able to identify it and value it to say, okay, this is how much peak is impacting me. I think it's a great way to stay in front of it. As this gets announced, we're going to provide clients, depending on the service that you have with us, either UPS or FedEx peak surcharge dashboard. This allows for you to be able to identify your year-to-date peak additional handling, what is its projected to hit to, and then large package, overmax, etc. And then we're going to follow suit with residential delivery surcharges. So if you have a question, if you're a shipper and you're listening to it and saying, hey, I need to know how much peak is going to impact me down to the penny. If you're a Sifted client, we can provide that for you. So you can type in also how much estimated growth you're anticipated to have this year. Run the calculation from that, and it will allow you to take that into consideration too. So some really cool modeling here that gets down to the penny. It allows you to be able to get in front of it from a budget standpoint. We have a question here that says, will the Teamster situation affect these surcharges? It's not official. UPS is not coming out and saying, yes, the Teamster situation is going to impact these surcharges. But if you're a UPS executive management team and your job is margin protection, and you have Teamsters that you're going to have to pay a substantial amount more money for, UPS isn't just going to pay that from their piggy bank. They're going to go to their client base, charge them more. They're going to do it in creative ways. They're not going to come out and say, more money, please, for the Teamster situation. They're going to do it through creative ways on the peak season and the GRI. So yes, I anticipate for UPS, if the drivers go on strike, for UPS to charge more on their peak season and GRI. They're going to have to walk a really fine line because they don't want to lose customers. So another area that we're going to focus on after the peak season is wrapping up. It's a 1-2 punch. Peak season's on the left, GRI, general rate increases on the right. The carriers are going to hit left first, peak season, right second with the GRI. And the GRI analysis is going to be done very similar to the peak season. If you're a Sifted client or if you're not, I would anticipate and would really recommend that you do this on your own, which is because the carriers are going to announce that the GRI is going to be on average a certain amount, doesn't mean that's going to be your averages. To Chris's question earlier about what industry is more impacted, the GRI impacts every shipper differently. So this year, UPS announced and FedEx announced, they both announced the exact same number, funny, that the GRI is on average 6.9% increase. But if you take into consideration your shipping characteristics, such as what we talked about, oversize, residential, additional handling, delivery surcharges, you're going to get hit harder than other shippers. So in this situation, this shipper, it was announced 6.9, but their accessorial fees are going to go up 12%. That leaves them with a blended effective GRI of a 9.39% increase. Again, these are ways that FedEx and UPS can get around this. Okay, so another question came in. This is a great question. My GRI is capped at a fixed percentage. Is my effective GRI also capped at the same amount? No. I think that's a great kind of stigma that a lot of shippers need to kind of get over. It is capped. See, you've got base impact and accessorial fee impact. If you have a GRI that's capped, it's more than likely capped on the base impact charges, which means if they say, hey, we're not going to, let's say my base is 5.5%. UPS announces 6.9. Sweet. I've got a base of 5.5. So it's only going to impact me 5.5. But that doesn't take into consideration the fees on the accessorial impact side. So you can see this shipper was going to be impacted 7.6. But with the accessorial impact, it now brought it up to blended 9.39. It's a great question. Good stigma to get over. There are a lot of great dashboards, visibility, data insights that you can dive into if you're a Sifted client. If you're not, download your billing files, start dissecting them, going through them. If you need help doing that, we're always available. But this peak season, I think, is going to be a very unique one because we have situations that are happening this year that haven't happened in a long time. Feels like it's just been this treadmill effect of, okay, we're on COVID for multiple years, unprecedented times. Now UPS potential strike situation, unprecedented times. I think at the end of the day, it means the carriers need more money and they're going to turn to their clients to get that money. What avenues can they get that money in? GRI and peak season. What questions do you all have as we kind of wrap this up? I know that there's some really interesting things that we're chatting about here, but I think that making sure that you subscribe to the Unboxed newsletter is extremely important, and sign up for our peak season and GRI analysis. If you don't know if you have access to that, reach out to your account rep and we'll be happy to answer that for you. But there's a lot of cool things that we can provide based on the data. Hopefully this has been really insightful in getting you to prepare and what to look for. Thank you all. I hope this is very helpful for you. I wish you the best of luck in the peak season prep. On your side, get out in front of the budget and communicate that budget increase to everybody else. Chris, thank you. You're welcome. Thank you for attending. Appreciate everybody being on.